Hey there everyone, Jeff from Tabletop Toolbox here, and folks, I am back. Welcome to the new studio, affectionately known as the Treehouse. Now, I'm going to apologize at the beginning of this because I still have a tremendous amount of work to do in this space. This is far from the final setup that you're going to see. I'm also going to apologize that the audio is as echoey to you as it is to me. I have some rudimentary sound absorption material in here, but I obviously have a long ways to go. But I'm in a little bit of a time crunch, and I really want to get this video produced for you folks. This is my second ever crowdfunding preview review video. And I am going to mention at the start of this that this video is sponsored in the fact that a preview copy of this game was sent to me by one of the game's designers. But the story of how we got there is kind of interesting, and I'm going to get back to that in just a moment. First of all, though, we're going to go back in time to August of 2016, when one of my favorite YouTube channels, Shut Up and Sit Down, introduced me to the idea of dexterity games when they reviewed
F em up. Jesus, it's Flick 'em up.
That does make a lot more sense.
That has always been one of my favorite clips on the internet. Flick 'em Up is a dexterity game with the cowboys and outlaws western theme that we all know now was pretty much made up purely for entertainment. In it, you're taking turns flicking discs at your opponent's characters trying to knock them down, and if you do, they lose a health point. It's pretty much as simple as that. But now I'm going to take it to April of this year when I was introduced to FlickFleet by Eurydice Games at a local game night. We were about 20 minutes into the game when this happened.
It's your turn. Jeff, it's your turn.
Oh, sorry. I was buying this.
Yeah, I was having an absolute blast. For one thing, it's a space game, and if you know anything about me, you know that I'm a sucker for a good space game. But on top of that, there's a little extra bit of depth here for a game that's just about flicking stuff. So I ordered a copy, and the next day received an email from one of the game's designers thanking me for the purchase.
Well, isn't that nice?
So, of course, I had to shamelessly plug my YouTube channel. And here we are. Let me take you through the base game and explain how it works. FlickFleet is a battle between the Imperium and the Uprising. Each faction has a variety of ships, each with a slight variation of different systems like engines, weapons, and shields. On your turn, you'll choose one of the ships that haven't already activated this round, and then you'll choose two of that ship's systems to trigger for the turn. If you want to move, for example, you'll activate engines, and you'll flick the ship itself along an edge shown in blue on the ship's dashboard. Activating weapons lets you place a die, either a D6 or a D10, depending on the weapon type, onto your ship piece, and then flick it in the direction of an enemy ship. Your shield generator will let you replace some of these shield cubes that may get knocked off during a successful attack. Now, some ships can also deploy fighters and bombers. Fighters are very maneuverable but fire your basic weapons. Bombers are a little harder to get around but fire devastating nukes. Now, right away you can imagine slinging the dice across the table at your friends, but here is where the rules get a little clever. After hitting a ship, the die has to stay in the play area in order to count, and that's about a 3-foot by 3-foot square on your table. That means that the further you are from your enemies, or the closer your target is to the edge of the play area, the more finesse is required in your shot. Any successful hit on a ship will first chip away at these shield cubes on the ship's dashboard. Once your shields are down, your ship's systems are vulnerable. Each of these systems are represented by these discs on your ship's dashboard, and the result of the die on subsequent hits dictates which systems of your ship take damage. A damaged system has its disc removed from the ship's dashboard, and if there's no discs remaining on that system, then the system is offline and cannot be used until repaired. Now, a roll of 7 through 10 on the D10 dice does nothing, but should a ship ever take damage where there's no system or no discs remaining, then the ship is destroyed. The good news is, if your ship is still in play, you can use one of your two actions to send an engineering team to repair one of your ship's systems, replacing the disc on the dashboard. Even better, your engineering teams can never be eliminated. They'll fight on to the bitter end.
Don't you worry, Captain. We'll beat those Klingon devils, even if I have to get out and push.
Now, there's some other rules in here, like accidental or intentional ramming of ships, but I'm going to get to those in just a little bit, because right now, it's time to talk about Xeno Wars. Xeno Wars is the newest version of FlickFleet, and it's actually a standalone game, since it comes with everything you need for more head-to-head combat. Xeno Wars pits the Hive against the Storm, and introduces some new ideas within mostly the same concepts of the previous game. The Storm ships are quite maneuverable and fire devastating positron torpedoes, which inflict 2 hits with each successful attack. Hive ships are alien indeed and fire parasitic borders, which not only apply standard damage with each successful hit, but also leave a cube, representing an unwanted intruder on the relevant system. Each time the infected ship activates, those intruders will first move through the ship, literally ripping it to shreds from the inside out.
Let's give him a little ride. Oh, we're gonna screw this ship up.
And that's not the only trick up the Hive's sleeve, as its mothership, the Queen, can not only launch drones, but can literally grow new ones as fleets are killed off. While Xeno Wars is standalone, you may not want it for just that reason, because you might want it for these. Yeah, that was perhaps a bit anticlimactic, but see, these are the bits of the 3 to 5 player experience of FlickFleet. The rules here are all the same except for this, the round counter track, and I'll be first to say that I really like what Paul and Jackson came up with here. See, as you take damage, your cube slowly climbs up this track throughout the round, and once all ships have been activated in the round, the turn order adjusts to prioritize the player who got picked on the most in the previous round. The system isn't perfect, as you may find yourself the first to fire with only 1 ship left on the entire battlefield, perhaps uttering its dying breath with a flick of your middle finger, but it is a bit gratifying, at least one chance for the bullied to become the bully themselves. Now let me take just one moment to mention the components, as each copy of FlickFleet is produced by Jackson and Paul using their own equipment. The dashboards are thick cardstock, the system discs and cubes are standard wooden components. The dice are also standard, nothing unique, but surely nothing problematic. There's nothing especially problematic about these either, the laser-cut acrylic ships that you'll use to represent your fleet. The standard edition of the game comes in the basic ship shapes seen here, while the deluxe edition adds an etching effect from the laser, which most usefully I think includes the name of the ship, which helps to track which dashboard gets modified during play. But the only thing I think worth noting is the way that acrylic with its smooth glass-like surface on the bottom behaves on certain materials. On glass, for example, acrylic can seem to stick since the surfaces fit flush together. It can behave similarly on smooth, varnished tables. On fabric such as this tablecloth or a neoprene mat, the sharp edges of the acrylic can snag fibers, causing a ship to come to a sudden stop. In contrast, wooden painted components of a game like Flick 'em Up or Crokinole are unevenly textured, but this actually helps level the playing field on a variety of different surfaces. Now I'm considering, and I'll admit that I just haven't tried it yet, taking a little sandpaper to the bottom of these acrylic ships to see if it'll help them slide a little better on a smooth surface. Now there's one other aspect of FlickFleet that I've given a lot of thought to, but to help demonstrate what I'm thinking, I'm going to show you a turn in one of my other favorite dexterity games, Crokinole. And now a turn in Flick 'em Up. And now a turn in FlickFleet. 3 very similar maneuvers across 3 very different games. So how do you make 3 different games that feel different but rely on the same mechanism? The answer requires these. For example, I could tell you that in Flick 'em Up, you move your characters around the table by temporarily replacing them with this wooden disc, and then flicking that disc to the location that you want your characters to end up. Makes sense, right? But it can't be that easy, because the designers have to take into account all the different ways that such an action can go awry. What if you hit one of your own guys? What if you hit something that shouldn't move, but can in a game environment? What if the disc leaves the table completely? All of these what-ifs requires rules to guide the gameplay, and FlickFleet is certainly no exception. In just the few times I've played FlickFleet, I've spent most of my time escorting my 1 or more opponents into what happens if their shot hits a ship but then leaves the play area, or if their ship hits another ship, and whether or not they meant to, or if they hit a ship with a ship, or hit a ship with fighters, or hit fighters with fighters, or fighters with another ship, and all the possible penalties that could result from any of these different outcomes. I often have to explain these multiple times too, because people don't inherently think of dexterity games as being complex or rulesy. They just want to send stuff flying around the table. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing about FlickFleet, but honestly, there is a bit more to this game than there is to, say, Flick 'em Up, which may have a more interesting table presence, but has gameplay that's only a few notches above Rock'em Sock'em Robots.
A left to the jaw, and...
If you break out some of the expansions to FlickFleet, one of which is required, by the way, for the full 5-player experience, you'll find ships that can deploy mines, ships that are purpose-built for ramming other ships, even a ship that can cloak. And while most players may just revert to flicking dice at each other round after round, there is something to be said about the nuance of a game that lets players retreat, repair, and even deploy supplemental units, all in a flicking game. And all this comes with one of my favorite aspects of a dexterity game, those stand-up moments. Those moments as everyone at the table watches a die miss a ship by just a few millimeters, or when an unintended movement suddenly slams 2 ships into an asteroid and the entire table erupts into cheers, jeers, and laughter. Those are the moments that a heavy Euro game just won't give you. But just like that heavy Euro, you gotta come to the table knowing the rules and prepared to police your friends before they let loose with fingernailed fury. Because as exciting as those moments can be, there's nothing less interesting than trying to put all the pieces back on a table where everyone thinks they may have been, because Johnny didn't know that he'd lose his dreadnought if he tried to use it as a battering ram. FlickFleet was also just a tad pricey for me, but I had to pay conversion rates and shipping from England. So that's definitely a me thing, but if it's a you thing too, then you should know that Eurydice Games does offer print and play versions of FlickFleet and all of its expansions for folks who have 3D printers or laser cutters. I'm actually tempted to try 3D printing some of the ships myself, as A, it could solve that surface material issue I mentioned earlier, but also could let me print some ships in colors they don't normally come in, as that could allow for things like ship seizure, espionage, or just setting up some bigger, crazier battles. And speaking of which, I didn't even mention that FlickFleet comes with a variety of scenarios you can play with in each different box, as well as rules for free play in which players agree on a fleet value to play with, and then choose ships of their fleet that total that number or less. So there you have it, FlickFleet and FlickFleet Xeno Wars. Yeah, no, seriously, I haven't unpacked any of my games yet. You know, I rarely buy games in the middle of a playthrough. In fact, I think the last time I did that was with this one. And while FlickFleet may not be as pretty as Eclipse, and it's certainly a bit rulesy from time to time, it is a very clever system built around a simple mechanism, and I just really appreciate that, and I really enjoy the game. Now, you can get FlickFleet right now off of eurydicegames.co.uk, and you can follow Xeno Wars when it comes out on GameFound in July of 2022. You can also get print and play versions of FlickFleet and all of its expansions, as I mentioned, including the 2 Box of FLICKS expansions, which I really hope will be add-ons in the GameFound campaign. Hint, hint, guys. Until then, I can't wait to see what Jackson and Paul come up with, because much like the universe itself, there's still a lot left here to be explored. Cheers.